Good evening, I'm Jose Cardenas. Tonight, we'll remember former Governor Raul H. Castro and hear from people who knew him. Coming up next on Horizonte.
Funding for Horizonte is made possible by contributions by the Friends of Eight, members of your Arizona PBS station.
Thank you for joining us. He was a governor, a leader, and a diplomat. Tonight, we remember former Arizona Governor Raul H. Castro, who died last week at the age of 98. He made history as Arizona's only Hispanic governor, but that's only part of his story. Castro followed an unlikely path that led to the state's highest office and presidential appointments. He came here from Mexico, spent time on the streets and in the farm fields. He even boxed for money at carnivals.
Raul H. Castro was born in Cananea, Mexico in 1916 to Mexican-born parents, Francisco Castro, a Union supporter, and Rosario Acosta Castro, a midwife. Castro endured much discrimination in his youth. He graduated with a teaching degree, but because he was Mexican, he couldn't get a teaching job, so to make a living, he took on grueling physical labor working on farm fields. He returned to Tucson looking for work worthy of his degree. And he did. He was able to get a job with the U.S. State Department in Mexico's American Consulate. This was his first experience in the field of law. He saved enough money to attend the University of Arizona College of Law. In 1949, he received his Juris Doctor degree and was admitted to the Arizona bar.
I remember asking my mother one day, I said, "Mother, what shall I be?" Because all my brothers were working in the copper smelters and the mines, etc., dirty and sweaty. She would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, cook their breakfast and their lunch, and go to work. And I thought to myself, is this my life in the future? That's when I asked her. She said, "No, son." The song said, "Shall I be pretty?" I knew better than that because I had a mirror. He said, "You shall be what you want to be." A prosecutor for about 10 years, a judge at Superior Court for many years, governor of the state of Arizona, and a diplomat for 14 years in Latin America.
Joining us now to discuss the life and legacy of Governor Castro are James Garcia, playwright and Castro family spokesman, Art Hamilton, former Arizona state lawmaker, Danny Ortega, Valley attorney and past chairman for the National Council of La Raza, and Petra Falcon, executive director for Promise Arizona. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
On this occasion. A remarkable life. We got just a thumbnail sketch there from the governor himself about all the things he did. And James, you didn't know him as early as the rest of our group here met him, but you've studied him a lot. You
Yes.
wrote a play about him. So let's talk a little bit about that early life, the discrimination he faced, his other careers as a boxer, as a farm worker?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of quick things. First of all, this man crossed the border during the Mexican Revolution. A very tumultuous time in terms of our relationship on the border, and then grew up during the Great Depression. So he was in a world already that came with hardships, but on top of that, he was Mexican born. He crossed undocumented. He didn't become naturalized until I think he was around 20, 21 years old, something along those lines. And he faced again and again the kinds of things that, I mean, if you Google now some of this stuff, but you can find on the internet now signs that said no Mexicans and dogs allowed in restaurants. In the times when he was elected to be a Pima County attorney and elected to be a judge, in that era, in this state, there were signs like that. And somehow he managed to succeed. And so his story is extraordinary on a lot of different levels, but I think ultimately because he was doing these things far ahead of the civil rights movement. He was making these accomplishments in this headway, way ahead of his time.
And part of it, other people have said, is that toughness that he had. And it's exemplified by his being a boxer, for example. And we've got a picture from the play where that's you as
That's me as Governor Castro. Trying to act as if I can box. I'm not a boxer by any means. No, he came from a world in which, I mean, his father was a union leader in Mexico, in Cananea, Sonora, also a mining town. Was exiled, was imprisoned for a time, was exiled, and that's how they came to the United States. But he grew up in that world, a blue-collar world, miners, people who worked very hard for a living. He somehow ultimately escapes that life, but that's the world he came from. as a boy, one of his jobs was to help his mother, who was a midwife, and a very well-known midwife, by the way, in the Douglas area. His job was to bury the afterbirths. As a boy, this was kind of the world that he functioned in, and so you can see he had a kind of a hard scrabbled sort of uprising.
Well, and the rest of you, Danny, Petra, and Art, you all came to know the governor in connection with his campaigns for governor. I'm not sure people realize he lost the first time out, which is in 1970. Petra, you got involved in the 74 campaign, but what drew you to him, and how much of a contact did you have with him before that?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to be part of this evening. And secondly, my condolences to the family and friends of Governor Castro. I was a teenager at the time. I was 19 years old at the time of the second campaign. And I came from a farming community, Sonorita, on the west side, in Glendale. And that the context of the time was that the farm working movement was growing. We were students at Arizona State University, and I mean, I didn't know it at the time, but the relevance of having a Latino, a Mexican American running for governor, and it was just a movement time. We were going out to the fields. There was a recall. The attempted recall of Governor Jack Williams, and then there was this Latino running for governor. And I was a grunt. In those days, we didn't have the voter activation network. We didn't have turf papers and all of the technology that we have today for campaigns. And to think that we were able to elect a Mexican American in 1974 was pretty significant in my life at the time.
Danny, you've become quite an admirer of the governor and came to know him well. But when you were about the same age, and particularly when the governor was first embarking on his first campaign, you didn't view him as somebody that you would necessarily want to support.
Absolutely. I don't think that back then we appreciated what Raul Castro meant to our community. He was the only Mexican American that I knew that ran for governor. And I'm proud to say that that today, not fully realizing back when I was a young man how important he was going to be to our lives. Mm-hmm. I can tell you that we didn't appreciate it. We were activists. We were fighting discrimination in a very aggressive way. We believed that he was part of the same group of people that were discriminating against us, though he was Mexican. We thought he was an apologist in many ways, and didn't give him the respect that I think he truly deserved. Now, you have to understand that Raul earned everything he got, given his tremendous background in history, because he came so close to winning the first time that he ran, that we realized, wow, this guy's for real. And though we didn't appreciate his politics, because he was running to win, just like everything else that he did in his life. And because he was running to win, there were certainly a lot of things that we thought he should be doing that he shouldn't do if he was going to win.
How much of it was, and Alfredo Gutierrez in his book, Hope is Not a Sin, described the governor as he said, a Mexican American of a different generation, didn't like the word Chicano. And so some of it's generational, don't you think?
Yeah, we had a clash with that generation. I mean, starting with the League of United Latin American Citizens. I mean, there were clashes with that group and that generation in many, many ways. I mean, they wanted to be as American as they could be, even to the point of forgetting their culture and forgetting who they were from the standpoint of language, and moving to North Phoenix and moving into other neighborhoods where there were Anglos. And we resented that because we wanted to preserve culture. We wanted to preserve our neighborhoods. And so that clash existed, but it existed even more so with Raul Castro because he was running for governor, and to be governor, there was no way he could identify with the same group of people that we did. But I think what's important here is to recognize that Raul Castro was just unbelievably successful in a way that we never could measure back then, because he stands to be the only Mexican-American governor in the history of this state. And when he left government, when he left being a diplomat and went back to his private practice, he began to talk like the Raul Castro we wanted him to be back in the 70s. He began to talk about his life and the discrimination that he faced, but he did it in a way that said, I didn't let that get in my way. I fought harder And despite all the obstacles that I faced because I was Mexican, I never let it hold me back.
And in the interview that we showed a segment of to start the show, he does say that the thing that gave him the greatest pleasure of all his jobs, as he described them, was talking to young people about how you can overcome with a good education and just being tough. Art, you helped elect him. You were involved in the first campaign and then in the second. Why? What attracted you to him?
Well, just the fact that he had the courage to run and the absolute belief, I mean, just the absolute belief he could win at a time when people wouldn't give him any real opportunity to win, particularly after the first campaign, and frankly, with some of the racist things that were used against him in the second campaign. But there was a side of him that was absolutely tough as nails, very polished and incredibly gifted in terms of how to handle himself in all kinds of crowds. But that fighter, that boxer, was always just beneath the surface. And I was happy to be a part of the campaign. I was helping Bruce Babbitt as well. But at the end, really didn't think we were really going to get there, even though he'd run very well in 70. But he refused to accept anything other than the reality that he was qualified, he was capable. As Danny said, he had earned the right to serve as governor, and that's where he was headed. And at some point, you have to kind of back up, salute, and respect that.
And I think people who feel that his tenure as governor wasn't all that they would have hoped for do say that. It's his life that was a remarkable example, the kind of thing that you were talking about, Danny. But as governor, it was short and not filled with that many accomplishments. The suggestion being he didn't like the kinds of deal-making, backslapping, hand-holding that you had to do to be successful in that arena.
It was not his natural bent. He really believed that you put good ideas on the table, they were rationally and thoughtfully considered, and people would make good judgments about what was in the best interest of the citizens in the state. And so if he were simply doing that, he ought to be successful. But sometimes, as a matter of fact, all too often, that has very little to do with what is successfully maneuvered through the legislature. And the kind of hand-holding, the kind of glad-handing, the kind of ego-stroking that's required just was not his cup of tea. He really believed that civility, comity, and good sense ought to be sufficient in a world where, frankly, all too often, the bottom feeders do far better than they deserve.
And James, your play touches on his tenure as governor and the confrontations, basically, with Alfredo Gutierrez, a young Alfredo Gutierrez, who's kind of your generation, Danny, and
I
had-
expressed.
Yeah.
Yeah, Alfredo was very young at that time. I don't know if he was
I think we
27,
even have a
28
picture
years
of
old when
that
he.
confrontation.
Yeah,
that-
yeah.
that
I
we
mean,
put up.
they become symbols for me in the play. Ultimately, I mean, Governor Castro was a man who came from.
I think that's Alfredo.
This is a scene, and the character, the actor on the right is Arturo Martinez playing Alfredo Gutierrez in this, and he does a terrific job, by the way. But this was a clash of personalities, but it was also a clash of philosophies. Governor Castro spoke often about a kind of disdain for what he considered glass breakers, people who just seemed to be intent on challenging the system rather than somehow using the system to advance the process. And he believed himself to be that person exactly, someone who manipulated the system, used it, moved ahead, worked it, understood it, etc. And he came up through the system. I mean, he came up through the ranks in terms of how he got himself through law school, and he came up through the ranks in terms of his politics. And he just believed in that as an approach, and he never quite understood the Chicano movement. He never quite understood why you had to march in the streets and be so radical, if you will.
Well,
right?
and if you look at his career, it really was that of a diplomat. His first job was working in the U.S. consulate, and then he has a series of ambassadorial appointments, and that had to have shaped his outlook on how you get things done.
It does. It shapes his outlook, and it also shapes his style. It definitely had a lot to do with his approach to politics in general.
You know, one of the things that was part of our culture at the time that I think created this clash is that Raul Castro truly was successful. And so it was, look at me. If you work hard, you can be successful like me. You don't have to be in the streets. You don't have to be yelling Chicano power. You don't have to do all the things that you're doing. I'm the prime example of what you can be in America if you want to be. Now, of course, we disagree, but we can't disagree with what he believed. and that is that he was immensely successful with his approach to life and the way he managed
Yeah, I
his
think he
life.
had two driving forces in his life. One was his belief wholeheartedly that education opened every future door for him. And that was played out in the way he lived. The other one was this really almost a kind of obsession to verify and validate to people around him that he was fully American, even though he had crossed undocumented, even though he had come from Mexico, that everything about his life should evidence to you that I am as American as you are. And he had extreme pride in the fact that he represented the United States of America overseas 3 times as a diplomat. That was probably, for him, the pinnacle of his profession.
And Petra, every time we talk about the governor, and of course in the last week or so, because he's passed, the tagline is the first and last Latino elected governor. So what's the impact of his having won that election?
Well, again, if you think back 40 years ago, 4 decades ago, and the fact that we elected the first statewide Mexican American as governor of Arizona, and it's been all that time that we haven't been able to win statewide. The impact, I think, goes back to young people, and I'm glad that he has this legacy of wanting to really engage young people. But I think his story is one is, yes, education is the door, being disciplined, having a goal. That sends a message to our young people that, yes, they can aspire to be the mayor of a major city in the state of Arizona. They can aspire to win to be governor of the state of Arizona. I think, to me, that's the strongest message and the strongest impact that he still has, because for those of us and many of us that are out in the community working with young people with civic engagement, I mean, that we can point to that story. And a lot of our young people don't even know that we had a Mexican American who won as governor for Arizona, and especially our immigrant community. So this is the moment to be able to tell that story and to tell it over and over again. We're sad that he's gone, but he is leaving a real important part of the narrative of our state.
Art, his long-term impact on politics in the state of
Oh,
Arizona?
I think he changed politics in Arizona for the better forever. I think much of what came after him that may not even have been directly related to his style or the way he conducted himself is nonetheless related to the fact that he was there, that he created that first. He demonstrated what was possible to do. And he did it in a way, I say, that surprised many of us. But the reality is, I think much of the success that has been enjoyed by people who came after him is tied to the fact that he demonstrated it could be done, and demonstrated it not only to us within our own communities, minority communities, but outside the larger community. He was a formidable force to be dealt with. As I say, you almost had to kind of get up close to him to recognize that he didn't apologize to anybody for anything. He felt he earned what he had achieved. He felt he represented himself and his community well. And I think the coalitions that were formed to help get him there, both in the Hispanic community, the African American community, the Native American community, I think many of those things live on. And I think all of us who had the privilege of serving public office to some degree are part of his legacy and owe him a debt of gratitude.
Well, the fact of the matter is that, and I still remember in those days that it was just unbelievable to watch the lines at the polls when he ran for governor. I mean, he was an
The lines of Latinos.
Of Latinos,
And
yeah, I'm
he
sorry, in
would
South
yeah,
Phoenix.
yeah.
I mean, long lines, and people were still out there at 10 o'clock at night waiting to vote. The lines were so long. We didn't have those mail-in ballots at those times. But it inspired me to want to study how it is that this man could inspire so many people to go support him. We used to get angry with him, believing we represented the people. We didn't represent the people. He did. 99% of the Latino community that got out to vote voted for Raul Castro. And part of the paper that I wrote was the statistics of how he increased the Latino vote in ways that we never imagined or could have done without him.
James, you've had the most recent contacts with the governor, extensive in preparation for his play. Did he ever express regret about leaving his term early and accepting the ambassadorship?
He did. He expressed regret. He said, first of all, he said that the decision was one of the hardest decisions he had ever made in his life. But he regretted that there was he understood a clear sense of disappointment in the Latino community about him leaving in the middle of that term. He left about almost 2/3 of the way through that term.
And part of that, we've talked about maybe his distaste for the bare knuckle politics, but you also had the bulls.
Well, I think there were
killing
several
and-
things. I think, like anything, particularly at that level, there's a lot of complicating sort of factors. And I think one of them was the fact that a prominent journalist was assassinated during his term. And it swallowed up
Someone
sort
who
of
was a friend of his.
A friend of his, Don Bowles. And it sort of swallowed up the news for months. And his administration, like a lot of other people, there was an umbrella of sort of suspicion about who might have been associated with whom and whether there were any ties to that. Ultimately, he was cleared. But it did kind of sour his taste for how he was being treated by the media and how he was being treated by the public. That was part of it. I think also, though, that we have to remember that this was a man who wore his Americanism on his sleeve. And as he put it to me, when the President of the United States, Jimmy Carter in this case, comes to you and says, I would like you to represent me overseas in Argentina, in a very troubled nation at the time, and I want you to do that for me, he thought that was something you cannot refuse. You just can't tell the president no. And that was also sort of part of his kind of persona and so forth. And so I think it drove him in ways that certainly had something to do with his decision to leave early. Now, his regrets in terms of letting the community down, he expressed them, and those were real for him. There's going back for a moment to Alfredo Gutierrez and sort of their different styles. I have a piece in the play, and the play is fiction. It's not a documentary, but I have a scene in the play, and there's a kind of a critical line in which the character of Alfredo Gutierrez says, "Don't you understand that the reason I march in the streets is so that people like you can make it?" And Castro's response is, "Don't you see that the reason I don't march in the streets is so that people like you can point to someone who really has made it?" And I think in many ways that line sort of defines the essence of this philosophical
Well,
kind
that's
of
what you were
difference that
getting
was
at, Danny.
moving through the political system at the time.
Absolutely. And if you look back at his example, I think we're on parallel paths, and there was a clash. We're on parallel paths, and the clash appeared, but it was just a different approach to politics. And the bottom line, he was the product of his generation that believed in all of the things that he represented. And I think that all of us can take a lesson from him, not necessarily from, what happened before his election and the path that he took, but that if you make up your mind and if you work hard and if you're educated and you believe in something and you have goals, that in America, that's the place to do it.
What kind of impact do you think his election had in his life, Petra and Art, on improving relationships between the different communities in Arizona? Because ironically, even within his final few years, he was stopped by Border Patrol and questioned in a way that a former governor shouldn't have been questioned.
I guess as I've been listening to this conversation and the tension between Alfredo and the governor, I keep thinking that throughout my years, Danny, there's always been this tension between Tucson and Phoenix. And I'm even thinking, is that something that played out during that time and still continues to this day? Yet, someone from Southern Arizona was able to win statewide. And here we are, many, many years later, and we are struggling in winning statewide as a Latino community. David Garcia came close this last year. But I think
perhaps an example that we haven't gotten past some of those biases, because given his opponent who spent no money, basically, and David was supported.
And hid.
Yes, and David was supported across the state, and people have speculated that maybe it was the last name that hurt him.
Well, and again, we have to think about what was happening 40 years ago and what's happening now nationally. Our worlds have changed. Social media, they tell stories, and who do you believe and don't believe. And I think also the population was different 40 years ago. All of us were Arizonans, Danny. We all were born here at some point. And here now we've got a diverse population, people that have come in from other states and people perhaps who have crossed the border. So the loyalty isn't still Arizona.
Yeah.
We're native.
I think all
I
of those
do want to do one
factors-
thing because we're almost out of time. And James, you're a spokesman for the family. Tell us quickly about the services that are coming up, the schedule.
Oh, so quickly, there's going to be a church service in Nogales and in Tucson on May the 15th, and then they will come here on the morning of May the 16th at St. Mary's Basilica here for a service, and then Governor Ducey will host a memorial service at the Capitol starting at 11 o'clock on Saturday the 16th.
And we're going to have to end on that. There's so much more to say. Art, you have some great stories. I apologize to all of you that we weren't able to do that, but thank you for joining us to talk about the life of this very remarkable man.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
you.
much.
And that's our show for tonight. From all of us here at 8 in Horizonte, thank you for watching. I'm Jose Cardenas. Have a good evening.
Funding for Horizonte is made possible by contributions by the Friends of 8, members of your Arizona PBS station.